kind of amazing. Your internet.
And we're live. It is Sunday, November 8th, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. And Kate has a horse story and a sea turtle story. And so I'm just going to turn it over to her with the caveat that, of course, the story has to end with the fact that we are not allowed to have fun anymore, even though they both sort of sound like a bit of fun. Kate?
We've been lying about the having fun ever since yesterday, so I feel totally fine with this. So the morning started with me confirming that I had found a horse to lease. It turns out you can lease horses. People do this because they don't have time to ride them or do whatever. Like, you don't take on the full cost of the horse or veterinary care, but you lease the horse to other people to ride, and they help take care of it, etc. And so I found. Let me see. Oh, see it. Hopefully, I can pull up the picture of of the horse here. It is a pretty cool. Nope, not that. It is a pretty cool. It is a pretty cool looking horse. It's kind of like a horse Dalmatian. I'd like to think it's an Appaloosa.
It's
Um,
beautiful.
yeah, and his name is Cisco, and he's like, he likes trail rides, and he rides English and Western, and I can't tell if, am I sharing my screen? No.
No,
Ugh, so annoying how this does this now. Um, it won't let me share my screen.
it'll let
Oh
me
well.
share my screen if you want to send me pictures.
It looks like it's letting me share my screen, but then it doesn't, is the thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know, it's just glitchy. Anyways, I will try to, but the um the picture, the horse is just, he's just gorgeous, and it's going to take me kind of a while to get down to where the stable is. It's like 45 minutes away from me, but I think it's going to be a really awesome like couple of months of finally being able to ride again. Anyways, then I did that, then I went clamming with Nina, and then I just
Now, what does it
another.
mean to go clam? Does Nina clam, or does she
Oh
just
no,
wander along with you
like
while you clam?
none of those things. Let me see if I can find uh let me see if I can. I wonder if I can. Well, anyway, I don't know why my I can't share my screen. It's very frustrating. I'm gonna try sending this to you, Ben. And well, if you can pull up the picture of the horse and share it, I sent it to you.
I have got the picture of the horse, and let me see if I can share it. Uh, mm, wait, which? Um, let's find your Twitter feed because it is on your Twitter feed.
Oh yeah, I can do.
Um,
Maybe I can do that. I can
well,
do that.
but if I do it, then I can share it.
Okay.
Um, all right. Let's see. There we go. Share. Now,
Yay! Yes, that
there is
is
the horse.
that is the horse. This is Cisco. He doesn't he kind of look like a Dalmatian in horse form, like even for an
Yeah, he's beautiful.
Appaloosa. Like, I think it's kind of crazy. They're not always this spotty. The mares are typically super feisty, but he's great. So I'm excited. And then in kind of it, and then you asked me about clamming. So clamming is super. We talked about this. I thought we talked about this. I go at low tide, and it's like mud flats, and everything is like deep black gunky muck, and I have a rake that is a clamming rake where the tines are like yay deep and about this far apart, and then like you rake the muck, the sand, until you hit something, and then when you hit something, you kind of dig down, you flip it up, and if it's a clam, you pick it up and you put it in your bucket. And if it's not, then you don't.
So
And
what's
then
Nina's role in all of this?
Nina laid on the beach and laid down in the sun like this, and then rolled over on her side and panted. She did nothing, basically.
I see. So it's not really like
It's not like a
you
dog
went
sport.
you went clamming and Nina came along to lounge around.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so yeah, she just lounged around. Well, she needed to go for a walk, and it's good for her to be outside. So she did that, and I did all the hard work. And then I collected a bunch of oysters. Those sit on the top, and you don't rake for them. You just kind of look for the right size and everything else. And I got about 3/4 of a bucket, which is like I don't know, like 3 or 4 dozen clams and oysters. And then I made them for lunch. And then I decided to go on a canoe paddle with John, at which point we literally had just gotten out. It was 3:30 and John was kind of yelling at me because he was like, we're not going to have enough time because you have to get back for the show. And I was like, no, it'll be fine. And we got out and we pointed the canoe towards like these birds. And it was all of a sudden the birds kind of cleared away. And then there was like this thing floating and seeming to like move that was in the middle of like this cove.
Let me guess. It looked like this picture.
Yes, that's exactly what it looked like. So this is a baby loggerhead sea turtle. Cape Cod, because of the shape of Cape Cod, like it's like an arm, they come around the point from like the Atlantic and get stuck in the bay and against the tides, and they can't make it out to migrate back, and they get cold stunned and wash up on the shore. And cold stunned is like they are cold-blooded, so if they get too cold, they just can't move enough to swim away or swim against the tide, so they just get caught in the tide because they're kind of like in slow motion and they can't find food. And so I basically just I had just read a newspaper article about this happening and them finding it was the season for this happening, and John and I were swimming, and John was like, do not pick that up, do not pick that up.
Yeah, can't imagine why.
I know, it's like he was like, Kate, no. Kate.
He was like, not again.
Yes. I'm like, it's like been 13 years of this. But it was like doing this like.
He was
it was
like,
just like.
We just got rid of the damn cormorant.
Exactly. So, but then I was like, no, there's a 24-hour turtle rescue hotline that the Mass Audubon runs specifically for this thing. And the guy, and like John was like, fine, we can like sit here with it in the boat for like 5 minutes. You have to call like the Mass Audubon and see if they can do anything, otherwise it's going back in the water. And I was like, okay. And they called the guy and he was like, turtle rescue hotline. And I was like, hello, I have this like 12-inch like loggerhead baby turtle. And the guy was like, where are you? We'll come and get it right now. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, I'm in a canoe in the middle of like this cove in like this saltwater creek. And he was like, well, give us an address. We'll meet you there. And I was like, all right. And so we paddled back to the shore. John was chastened. And he carried the paddles and all the things back while I carried this beautiful, beautiful little turtle up to the
It's
the
not
house.
a little turtle. It's like the frickin' size of your head.
I know, but that's the funny thing is because I thought it looked so little because I know how big loggerheads are, like they're huge. And like when the lady from the Audubon Society came, the first thing she said was like, "Oh my God, he's such a little one." And I was like, "See, I told you, John." And so, anyways, so we just put it in the same Rubbermaid that we had put the cormorant in. And we're like, John's like, I'll get the cormorant bucket. Like, it's just like, which is now the sea turtle bucket. And it's hung out there for 10 minutes. And I thought that they would take a while to get there. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll have it on the show. And so I texted you a picture of it. And
it was going to be mystery guest number 2.
I know. And then like the lady came like 5 minutes later. I was like, okay, well, anyways, it was. And John was like, you were right and I was wrong. And that was the second best part of the whole experience.
So, all of which leads to the key point.
We do not have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we have horses and turtles. And David Priest. So nice to have you.
mystery guest David Priest,
Hello.
who is neither an Appaloosa horse nor a loggerhead sea turtle, but has written a book
Have
with
you
the
checked?
with the appropriate title, "How to Get Rid of a President,"
I love this.
which seems apropos of this weekend's national activities. And so I thought, as our mystery guest, we would have David on to talk about the many ways to get rid of a president and what their roughly normal distribution is. And so let's talk them through. David, we just voted the motherfucker out of office. How common is that a way to get rid of a president?
That was the initial title, and the publisher chose to go with something else. Oddly enough, I don't know why. Something about actually
something
selling
about
books. I don't
propriety and
Yeah, something silly like that. Actually, the funny thing is, there's a story behind the cover that I haven't really told before, which is, and I'll pull this up. Thank you. This is the actual cover. Okay, so you see there's the faint Richard. Hello, I'm peeking
Hang on.
around.
Yeah.
Wait,
Tricky Dick.
Nixon. It's Nixon. It's Nixon's hairline, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's Nixon. That's Nixon being behind the swath that is basically removing him. So, there's some symbolism there. There was some great debate between the cover designer, the head of house, and me about which president should be there in the picture. They tried some of the presidents that were on currency because those are the best known images, but none of them really applied. We didn't really get rid of Washington in the same way that I'm talking about through most of the book. And essentially we decided on Nixon, but one of the cover designs was actually a cartoonish image of a figure in black with a red tie, with somewhat outrageous hair that was long in the back, little bit portly, carrying out a box of his belongings, like a plant and a box of books and all that, and walking across the cover.
Do we think he's a good enough
And
person
everyone
to have
who
plants? Let's be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you included what he actually would be stealing from the White House, it would be giving ideas. So the idea,
Hey, at least
the
he's not.
publisher
At least
had
he's
was-
not like Bibi Netanyahu and bringing his laundry to the White House.
No laundry was in the picture. No one wants to see that underwear. So they had this design, and they said, we're kind of mixed about it. What do you think? I said, well, it does evoke something, and it was actually not an image taken or a profile of who it certainly looked like. It was a random image that simply had been put together, but it certainly brought out the idea that this is the current occupant of the Oval Office. And I realized the book really isn't about him per se. It's about history. It's about what America has done right for 200 and some years. It's not electing presidents. It's the fact that presidents
Get rid of them.
leave without starting a civil war every time, like many countries I studied back in the day used to do. We actually learn more about America by studying the ways that leaders gracefully say, okay, I'll give up power, instead of looking at all this attention we give to all these aspects of electing them. So yeah, we ended up choosing the Nixon cover because we thought it was more accurate. Nixon obviously gets some serious attention in the book. Ben, you asked, how do we get rid of a president? Let me just very quickly hit the bottom lines of each of the methods, and then we'll circle back and we'll get the discussion going.
And I have
on
a very important diagram I need your comment on. So let's run through the thing, and then we're going to study a diagram that my older kid found on Tumblr.
Uh-oh. Is it clean?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Methods of getting rid of a president. Number one, you can impeach and remove a president. We have yet to do it, although I make the point in the book that Nixon left because of the impeachment and removal process, even though it wasn't seen to completion. Number two, you can use the 25th Amendment to declare the president unable and temporarily remove them. It is not a permanent removal, but it is temporary for the time of the condition of the disability. Number three, something I did that was a little unusual, which is I looked at removing a president in place. That is, dismissing them from some of their powers whether opponents or subordinates do it, by not letting them exercise the full powers and duties of the office. Things like taking memos off of their desk so they can't sign them, which reports say happened in this administration, and certainly things like that have happened in previous ones. Another method of getting rid of a president is you actually remove them preemptively. You don't let them take office in the first place through dirty tricks or other means. And yes, we've had that as well. Another method, you can let nature take its course. You can actually wait for the president to die in office. And it was the only way Republicans could get rid of Franklin Roosevelt. Another method,
Sorry.
you could take him out by force. Not let nature do it, but speed it along. This is the only one of the methods that is never okay. Perhaps the reason that we've been able to do so well removing presidents by these other means is because we haven't resorted to force in any situation, despite some activities of some people who should have known better along the way that did kill 4 presidents. Another method, the penultimate method, is you actually reject the president for renomination. And this is up to the political party. And we haven't done it much lately, but you can remove a president by saying, yeah, we were behind you the first time, but we'd rather nominate anyone else other than you for the next election. And this used to happen back in the 19th century a lot. And then the final method is really the base method. It's the best method. And that is voting them out, the voters, the people of the United States saying you're fired and not giving them a chance to get into the Oval Office again. We've seen almost all of these in the Trump administration, but ultimately it is this last one that is removing the president.
All right. So
I have a question about one really quickly.
Go for it.
The party one. Couldn't like that doesn't actually remove, that's just like likely removal, right?
Yeah.
Because like they could run without the party. They don't become disqualified to be president or like taken out of office because the party doesn't back them. It just means that they're like not likely to win, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay,
theoretically
I'm just
possible.
making sure that I was like,
no,
I missed something.
Yeah, no president who has lost the mandate of his party, and so far it's all his. None of them have gotten back in, and many have tried. Yeah, many have tried.
The closest
Tyler
came...
kind of tried.
Oh, really? Tyler tried?
Teddy Roosevelt
Van
famously
Buren
tried
hard. Fillmore tried. Teddy Roosevelt came closest by even beating out his handpicked successor, William Howard Taft. But in the act of doing so, giving the presidency to a low 40% popular vote winner, which was Woodrow Wilson. So many presidents have tried to get back in without the stamp of their party. But once your party gives up on you, you are effectively removed from the presidency and you ain't getting back.
All right, so let's go through each of those in sequence. But before we do, I want you to comment on this amusing piece of net trash.
Yes.
Which my older kid found today and sent to me, and I irresponsibly tweeted. But the more I look
irresponsible.
at it,
that's good government.
The more I look at it, the more I think it is basically right, though it may contain some omissions.
Right.
What do you think of it? Is it historically accurate? Is it unfair? Is it should there be more circles in it? And is it disinformation that was irresponsible of me to circulate, or is it a genuinely valuable solid piece of internet humor?
Yeah, I'm going to have to take my eyes down to look at it, so pardon me, everyone.
You're very good at looking at the camera. I can't do it for long periods of time.
I have to. I picture you in the small dot of the camera, and it makes me smile. What can I say? Impeached or resigned is the easiest one here because you only have 4 presidents who were impeached or resigned, and they're all in the pink circle somewhere. So good on the circles of suck at the top. That's good. In terms of lost a second term, we got Van Buren, we got Carter.
I'm very impressed that you can name all of these.
Ford lost a second term, but not really. I mean, he was not an elected president in the first case, but was he president and running for more time in office? Yes. So semantically, maybe wrong, but I think the idea is correct. George H.W. Bush lost a second term. Who do you see? John Adams lost a second term.
Carter.
We got Franklin Pierce lost a second term. Herbert Hoover lost a second term. Franklin Pierce, it's not really clear how hard he wanted the second term. I mean, he didn't end up getting the nomination for a second term, so did he lose it? Hard to say. It's kind of like Lyndon Johnson, who is not shown here because he famously said in March of 1968 that he was not going to run for another term. He was going to focus on Vietnam instead. But behind the scenes, he was clearly maneuvering to be nominated at this brokered convention, and he would be the knight in shining armor who would come in and save the party. That's really what he wanted. So he lost a second term in a way of speaking, and he probably should be in there for that reason. Grover Cleveland is there, I see at the bottom of the blue, but Grover Cleveland certainly made up for it because he lost his second term. He actually ended up getting his second term. He just waited.
Yeah, he just
4
waited
years
4 years for it,
to do
which
it.
is clearly what Donald Trump is thinking about. But I guess I guess my question boils down to: is it fair to treat Donald Trump as a singular intersection of the three big lobes of this Venn diagram?
Absolutely. I don't see anyone else. I mean, the impeached or resign takes out almost everyone else. So that one's easy. If you don't have the pink, you're not at the center of this. What is it? Euler circles? I can't remember the Venn diagram.
Yeah, it's just, which I call a Venn diagram for obvious reasons.
Yeah, you do. But you're not on it.
No.
Yeah. Yet.
Because I lost the popular vote.
Do you spell it with two N's?
Yes.
Lost the popular vote. I think you have several others who lost the popular vote. I don't think it was just Adams and Harrison. I thought there was one more, but I can't think of it right now. It'll come to me eventually. But I think it is fair because Trump is the only one who sucks in all three ways described here. So I would have to study it before I went on the record, but my initial look at all of this says this is pretty damn good.
Okay, so that gives you all permission to share it on social media, it having been essentially validated, at least in broad spirit, by an authority on getting rid of the president. So now go tweet it. So let's talk about the many different ways to get rid of a president. The one we think of as really, dramatic is impeachment. As you say, there's only 4 examples of the attempt.
I won't go that far.
Well, four examples of an impeachment. Or
of actual,
an attempted impeachment.
Or close to it.
Right.
Nixon being the closest that didn't reach it, but many, many other cases that were pursued from John Tyler. There were actually charges of impeachment I discovered in researching this that I didn't know. There were charges of impeachment that were introduced, not passed, of course, against people like Harry Truman and Herbert Hoover, and I think even Grover Cleveland. And these are things I had never heard of before because they were the dogs that didn't bark.
And they just hadn't voted to impeach.
What's that?
So like they had someone had introduced like charges of impeachment and they had failed.
Resolutions, yeah.
Resolutions, okay.
Right. In some cases, they didn't even get beyond the floor speech. They were merely ignored.
Wow.
In some cases, most often, they're sent to committee and they die a miserable, slow death in committee before getting voted on.
I mean, George W. Bush.
But a lot of presidents. A lot of presidents have had impeachment resolutions discussed, but the only ones that move forward enough to consider them realistic impeachment chances are probably the ones that are in the circles of suck.
Okay, but I want to give a little bit of. I would submit that absent the impeachment charges against Andrew Johnson, he might have been a viable candidate for a second term. Normally, an incumbent president is, right? Absent the impeachment of Donald Trump, he may have gotten a few tens of thousands more votes in certain states.
I don't know about that. I'd have to look at, and honestly, I haven't seen a single poll that asked this question, but to the extent that voters can rationally separate out their reasons for voting, which I'm skeptical as a political scientist of. I think we are not, none of us are good at understanding our reasons for decisions, especially over a period of time. But how many people made their decision based on President Trump's reelection, based either primarily or largely on the fact that he was impeached?
Yeah, but I wouldn't. But
I don't see it.
I wouldn't frame it that way. I would frame it: how many people's views of Donald Trump were meaningfully conditioned over time by the sequence of the Russia investigation, the Mueller report, the almost immediate there following Ukraine, l'affaire ukrainienne, right? These, and then the impeachment. And this is a sequence of events that I think meaningfully contributed to Donald Trump's never having an approval rating above 44%, despite until this year having presided over a fairly successful economy and and just in terms of holding his ceiling down, I think the sequence of events that leads to his impeachment are pretty important. And so I guess my question is, and I think that's clearer in the case of Andrew Johnson, right, where, he has a poisonous relationship with Congress that ultimately leads.
Literally.
Oh yeah, I mean it's some seriously ugly shit.
I think some of them would have done it if they had the chance.
Yeah, and Thaddeus Stevens was, he would have cut his head off if he'd had the chance.
Well, it's funny because he said in public speeches he was out saying that Thaddeus Stevens should be hanged. I mean, this is a sitting senator and one of his outspoken opponents, and he's out there calling for his hanging. Thankfully, we don't have that rhetoric out there today.
Oh, except from Steve Bannon. So my question is, you've divided the book up into the mechanisms of final removal. But in fact, these forms of removal feed on one another, right? And Nixon is the only one who is removed by means of the impeachment process, although resignation, actually, even he isn't really. But he's not the only one whose removal is conditioned by the impeachment process.
You're right. And you're right about this, intersection that's going on, because there are several presidents, not surprisingly, the really shitty ones, who show up in almost every chapter, right? So Andrew Johnson appears in several of these. John Tyler appears in several of these. I mean, they're the people that basically had people undermining them or trying to remove them in all ways. And there's not a perfect correlation, but there's a good correlation of that with the fact that they sucked as president. And in Andrew Johnson's case, not to get too nitty gritty in the history, but I don't know whether the impeachment itself was really that important, because the things about Andrew Johnson they were impeaching him for, there was no discovery. There was no revelations during the impeachment process. He violated a law that was on the books, which was later deemed unconstitutional. But at the time, the Tenure of Office Act was the law of the land. He violated it. It was known. It was public. The impeachment process itself, I don't think had that much of an impact on whether the Democrats or any other party were going to nominate him in 1868. I think it was his acts that did it. Similarly, for Donald Trump, I agree with almost everything you said, teeing it up in terms of the importance of these things intersecting with each other. But the act of his impeachment itself, I don't think was decisive for many voters. People who knew about what he did in the Ukraine matter or in earlier matters were not more likely to vote him out because of his impeachment in the House than they were before then. And I'm not sure too many people who were okay with the act in Ukraine were suddenly less likely to vote for him simply because he was impeached by the House of Representatives. If anything else, that might have locked some people in who were kind of the soft Trumpers. So I'm not sure how to disaggregate that, because political science is really bad at that when it comes to voting decision making on things that occurred long ago. But there's definitely something to the fact that the impeached presidents had a lot more going on than just the fact that they were impeached. They had a lot of bad things going on, and they had a lot of reasons why people didn't like them in the first place.
Does impeachment have an arc? I mean, does impeachment have an arc of times that it's been used? I mean, we have like a period like Nixon in which it was not really particularly political. There was obviously this incredibly, well, I mean, it was political, but it was not like Democrats got very upset about something and decided to like turn like something into an impeachable offense. It was like just such a kind of monumental monumental kind of crime that he had committed. So it was just,
Yeah.
if that makes sense at all. But what I'm basically trying to say is like, you could make arguments, and we have that like Clinton's impeachment was a political kind of calculation by the right. You could make arguments that Donald Trump's was a political calculation by the left. Is that like a thing that has like cycled through the political landscape of the presidential office and Congress as like a pushback method that does it like resurface when there's like more like kind of we're having a moment of populism or things like that?
Yeah, I think so. We definitely have this cyclical thing where talk of impeachment tends to peak every 20 years or so, but it is not uniform across American history. But I would say on your last point that every impeachment is political, and the founders wanted it that way. They put the impeachment power in the House of Representatives, the body closest to the people, closest to the most recent overwhelming political election of all representatives. And they put the conviction in the Senate, which of course they did not imagine as directly elected, but has ended up that way.
Mm-hmm.
But still, if they wanted an apolitical process, they could have done what some other countries do, which is they actually put it in the hands of the judiciary, trying to make it less political. Or
Yes.
there are even some countries, I can't remember if it's Italy, it's somewhere in Europe, that when they're seeking to remove a president, they seek a body of random citizens combined with some jurists, which is just fascinating to think about. If
That's
you
really
draw
interesting.
by lot out of 330 million people, 7 people who will decide the fate of the president.
That's actually
and
terrifying.
then you get My Pillow guy as one of them. Right.
That is completely
yeah. It is,
freaking
and that's
nuts.
why very few places have it, and why Italy is not generally regarded as the model for a political system for emerging
And it's
democracies.
funny because they had Rome, so there was like.
All right, so let's talk about other means of getting, like some of the more obscure means. Let's go from the most casual to the most violent. Which presidents did we get rid of by their own parties losing faith in them?
Yeah. Even more casual than that, of course, is just letting them die.
No, we're going to get to that because death is it's passive, but it doesn't end well for the individual.
Passive for the opponent, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it was easy for the opponents of William Harrison to just sit back for 31 days and then he's dead.
Right. So
not as easy for FDR.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about that in a little while. But this is the one where all you have to do is piss off your own party and they go and nominate someone else. How many presidents have we lost through this? Because this is the way Trump really should have been dealt with.
Yes. Yeah, it depends on, and honestly, one of my biggest surprises, and I've had some very bad predictions in the last 5 years. One of them was the extent to which few other prominent Republicans challenged Trump in the primaries. I mean, you had Bill Weld, good for him. You had Joe Walsh, good for him. And you had some minor other candidates, Sanford in South Carolina, but you did not have a major establishment figure coming out and saying, yeah, we totally fucked up. We're gonna do a redo and we're gonna get this right. That was a surprise to me because that did used to occur more often. You did used to have other members of the party say, holy cow, we screwed the pooch on this one. We've got to correct this. And we will lose credibility as a party in not only down ballot races, but in the future, if we keep doing stuff like this. The Whig Party back in the 19th century partially disintegrated because of this very thing of nominating general after general who may have been good field generals, but weren't very good political candidates.
But isn't it
Kate, I
true?
see you jumping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like kind of I was just thinking about how like what you're saying is like the only time that it really matters if a party loses credibility is if there's a viable third party that can come in and possibly it seems like that's
Mhm.
kind of or there's an up and coming third party or someone is staging kind of like a force to break the vote and lose the vote because then otherwise you have impetus, you have like kind of just like the
Yeah.
inertia of having your guy in office already, right, like I mean because the if
Yeah.
like people if people can go a little bit to the middle or whatever, like instead of going all the way to the other side, then they'd rather do that, and so that's where kind of the threat comes in.
I agree with you on that. Elections at this level are almost always about other options, and what are the other options to even an unpalatable one over here, and where does it go? That's why Trump versus Biden looks very different than Trump versus Sanders would have looked under all the same conditions otherwise. But in terms of the history, Ben, it depends. To give you a firm answer, it depends on what you count as the party rejecting the candidate, because sometimes it's formal. Sometimes you have somebody running for reelection and they go into the primary process and then they actually lose. And it's a number of votes and they're formally kicked out of the contention for the presidency. More often, what seems to happen is they game out the process. They talk to their advisors, they talk to party leaders and say, what's going on? And they say, you don't have the votes. You don't have the votes. And you're not going to get to that stage. But if you go back to the 19th century, there were
Got a nice
several who
ring
did
to it,
run.
that line.
Thank you. I don't have the baritone Ben has, but I try.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Do it.
don't have the votes.
Whoa, that was not bad.
Whoa. I think you broke my speaker with the last note.
I know.
Yeah.
Sorry, I actually can
Yeah.
I can hit that note if I'm warmed up, but I
Yeah.
can't do it now.
Yeah. So you've got several. I'll say roughly, give or take, and 8 to 10 presidents have wanted to be renominated and have not been renominated. Now, that may mean they formally sought the renomination and got formally rejected and embarrassed, or it may have been that they dropped out at a certain point, formally or informally, to do it.
So
Um,
since
we haven't.
we're
The reason this seems
in
weird is because it just doesn't happen lately. We don't have it in the last 20 years.
so since we're in the blood and guts TV business here on In Lieu of Fun, what is the most humiliating example of a president seeking renomination and its party just saying,
Hell no,
"Fuck you,
dude.
man. We're going with
Yeah.
Millard Fillmore." What?
Now, I got a weird one for you. And actually, this isn't one that I write about much in the book because he was already gone as president. But Ulysses Grant had 2 terms as president. And now they are considered generally not so good. Kind of better general than president, sir. That's how they're considered now.
Yeah, but he was very
But
popular
at the time, Grant was still popular. Yeah, even after leaving office. And he considered running for a 3rd term and breaking what was by then known as the Washington precedent, whereby you step down after 2 terms. When Washington stepped down, people didn't really see that as a precedent. It was just a Washington thing. But by Grant's time, they realized, wait a minute, you would not be doing what the great revered Washington did. But Grant did not run again. But he went around the world. He was courted by kings, queens, leaders of other countries. He came back to the United States and was treated better than the president in some ways. And so finally, 4 years after leaving office, he made a run for it. And the Republicans came really close to nominating him again, but he lost. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about why. One reason is he didn't want to come back from his overseas tour too early, because if he did and he started pushing for the nomination and he didn't get it, it would tarnish his reputation. So he stayed away for a while and he didn't start ramping up his campaign such that it was back then, which is nothing like now. But he didn't start ramping it up. And his supporters said, you're wasting time. Others are building momentum. You should have started much earlier. But also, he never really put everything into it, even up to the end. So it didn't look like people who were fighting for him and were going to burn bridges to do so would actually win at the end, even if they pushed really hard. So Grant probably would have been a 3-term president before FDR did it. He just would have done that Grover Cleveland thing where he took some time off first, but he didn't. He lost the nomination.
I mean, I barely remember Grant because he came at the very end.
Because you were really young then.
Because you were young. Yeah.
Well, he'd be on CNN and he just would like go on and But anyways, no, he's at I think he my American history kind of peters out like right after the Civil War because anyways.
Yeah, there was a Civil War and then there was World War One and World War Two.
No, but I took it from Gordon Wood, and so he just kind of stops writing at the end of the Grant presidency, but like really he stopped teaching in the class at the end of at the end of the Civil War and just like didn't want to talk about Grant at all. So anyways, all I remember is that he was a kind of a jerk and that he like didn't have any
man, he wrote the best autobiography ever.
Really?
And
I've
as he
never
was
read
dying of
Yes.
painful throat cancer.
Yeah, so
Yes.
the autobiography of Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh, this is wonderful to learn.
So
this is good.
It is a fabulous story, and it is a fabulous book. He was in his old age cheated out of by an unscrupulous financial advisor of his entire fortune, and he did not want to leave his family destitute. So he, while he is dying of throat cancer from all of those pipes and cigars,
he was always smoking, right?
Yeah. He writes on the porch of his front yard of his house his memoir, which is a rip-roaring yarn. It's fabulous.
Really?
It's
I'm gonna see
It's like it's really like you open it up and you cannot stop. It's a total frickin' page turner. The guy
Adam Badeau, one of his
guy
aides helped
really
him a lot with it, and there was some contention over that later, but it appears most scholars say mostly that was Grant. He poured his heart and his soul into it to finish it on time, and it was close.
And there are
but it was at the point where he couldn't talk and he was in pain, and somehow he was still crafting pretty damn good prose about events that had occurred 20 years earlier.
And it's quite funny in spots. And and there are wonderful photos of him on the porch of that house wrapped in a blanket, wasting away writing this book. And he dies, the book is published, and it has been continuously in print ever since. And it is a wonderful, wonderful book. I think by far the best autobiography of a president.
I just ordered it on Amazon. I literally it's $8. I'm going. No, that sounds like.
If you got an original copy, let's talk. Yeah.
So,
although it had a huge print run, I think I may be wrong, but I think it was the largest print run of a memoir in American history at that point. It was a very popular book. It sold incredibly well, mostly after he died. But it did accomplish its purpose, which is it provided for his family.
Yeah. And it's one of the really cool things about it though is it actually, the lesson that we all have of Ulysses S. Grant, right, that he was basically a failure in all things in life, working in his father-in-law's dried goods store when the war breaks out, finished last in his class at West Point, all of that is all this self-description that he has in the book, of like, things weren't going well for me, but boy, was I good at war, and it's
he's very honest.
It's very cool. All right. So
that's an awesome kind of recommendation.
Let's talk about getting voted out. How many presidents have sought a second term, been nominated, a la the Trump thing? We know about Jimmy Carter and Mr. The Elder Bush, but it's not that common.
No, by my count, and I have to, I'm confusing my numbers here because I'm adding in new information since the book. I think we're at 11 now, but I might be wrong by one either way because of my math. But yeah, we sometimes have presidents run again and get rejected. Thankfully, it happened early, which is John Adams. And it set the precedent that it's okay to be voted out, even by somebody that you absolutely hate at the time, which is a shame because Adams and Jefferson used to be buds. But then they were estranged famously for years.
Yeah.
And yeah, they were estranged for many years and then got back together. And their exchange of letters late in their life is actually one of the greatest American stories there is because of their reconciliation over this bitter dispute. But Adams made it okay. I mean, to be a founding father and to lose in a bitterly contested election with the epithets flying, and then to step aside and say, but I'm not going to make a thing of it. This is America. He actually set a precedent that was better than Washington in many ways because of that. So yes, you had presidents who ran and lost. We already mentioned Cleveland, one who ran, lost, and then said, yeah, you just wait.
Yeah, so this is the precedent Trump is clearly thinking about.
Right. He's clearly a Grover Cleveland, in some ways more than others.
I should
Grover
name
Cleveland.
Somebody, we should bring back the name Grover. Like, it got, like Sesame Street kind of like took it over, but like just Elmo, Grover, those should be taken back.
In Washington, it's it became really more of a dog poisoned name. By Norquist.
Oh, yes. That's such a good point.
There is that. There is that.
Who also has facial hair like Grover the Muppet.
But there's a fun, there is an interesting discussion among political scientists and historians about, well, what are the actual factors of running and losing? Because if you know you're going to lose, often you don't run again. So the numbers would be higher if Lyndon Johnson actually did enter the primaries in 1968 and he did win the nomination.
Right.
And then he got slaughtered by Nixon. He would be on this list of presidents who ran and got voted out. But he looked at the numbers early in 1968 and said, yeah, there's no way I'm going to win. Probably he thought I'm not going to win the nomination, but he certainly thought he wouldn't win the election. So there's some interesting dynamics here when you look at the numbers that they are skewed by the fact that events have consequences.
All right. Which brings us to died in office both naturally
I shouldn't have smiled so much.
Less than naturally. Let's divide that into, let's deal with the croakers before the ones who are actually croaked. How many presidents have died in office of natural causes?
4 so far.
And they are?
Let's see. We had William Henry Harrison, who famously died 31 days after his inauguration.
Yeah, that was not a good run.
Commonly attributed to the fact that he gave a speech for his inauguration that was ungodly long, and it was a windy, cold day, and he caught cold and died. Well,
although
despite our mothers, we don't actually die from getting cold, but he probably got pneumonia.
So there is actually a relatively recent paper on this that Susan and Hennessy and I discovered when we were doing the research for the unmaking of the presidency. Turns out there's quite good evidence now that he was actually killed by a infection that was a kind of bacterial infection from sewage. That's
even more true for Zachary Taylor, who died not that long later. Zachary Taylor died, and the mythology for years was because it was the 4th of July. It was an incredibly hot day, and he ate cherries and drank milk. And people thought it was spoiled milk and rancid cherries because of the heat. But later research has shown it was probably because of bacteria in the water supply in Washington and the fact that sewers were near water and that doesn't always mix well. So Taylor died too.
Taught me it's not usually milk and cherries. It's usually cholera. And so
milk and cherries is a euphemism for cholera.
Okay.
Yeah, it was the soft way of saying it. You had Warren Harding, who died in office. And perhaps thankfully so, because he was not the greatest of presidents either. And then, of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who could not be removed any other way that his opponents tried. So that's 4. Many others came really close. And because we don't recognize the cases that came close, we don't know those stories as well. But
So
James
wait,
Madison almost died early in his presidency because of a very strong sickness, an intestinal ailment. And we've had many others
Woodrow
who were
Wilson
quite
almost
sick.
died twice in office.
Yeah, and
really?
Woodrow Wilson, yeah,
I didn't know
yeah,
that.
So
he was
What
not a
happened?
well man.
at Versailles, at the treaty negotiations of Versailles, he
Yeah.
got what was almost certainly the 1918 flu, it being
Oh,
1919 or something,
yeah.
and he was felled for more than 2 weeks in the palace, and barely recovered, and was really never the same again. Finished
Right.
up the negotiations, goes home, and then has his stroke, from which he never recovered. And his wife, Edith, was effectively acting president for the last few
I
months of
do
his presidency.
I do remember that part. That's why I didn't know that. I didn't know about the 1918, or I didn't know about the. I didn't know that he got the flu,
Yeah.
um, in 1919.
There's some speculation that that he actually was having an earlier stroke at Versailles as well. And how you disaggregate that is hard. Medicine over 100 years ago was not where it is now. But I do want to address one thing from the comments. Linda asks about presidents and formal state funerals. And that was not always a thing, but the biggest case there, and I love this story in a kind of a self-hating way as an American, but I totally get it, which is we have one president whose death was never officially acknowledged by the US government. And that was John Tyler, one of our worst presidents. But he had been president after William Henry Harrison died, and he only was in office for just under 4 years, and he did not get renominated. He tried every party. He basically tried to get back in, and he couldn't. But he made a fateful choice, which is when the Confederacy came about. He decided to go with the Confederacy instead of with the Union, and he allowed himself to be elected to the Confederate House of Representatives. He died before he took office, but probably because of that, the US government did not even officially acknowledge his death, and to this day, he remains the only president who has not been officially acknowledged dead.
As in, from
Wow.
the U.S. government's point of view, he's still alive.
Yeah. No, well,
Wait.
not that he's not
No,
still on the books and
that's
voting
not.
in Nevada or anything. I mean, don't create a conspiracy here, but he was not. The government did not formally announce his death and celebrate his accomplishments. We'll put it that way.
Excellent. So this brings us to the two last categories, which one of which we've already touched on, which is removed in place, and the other
Mm-hmm.
is the awesome category of people who met untimely ends. So, other than Woodrow Wilson, who has been sufficiently debilitated as to be effectively removed in place?
Yeah, removal in place is a funny thing because I split it into two ways. One was removed in place because they're disabled or unable to do the job. And before the 25th Amendment in 1967, in theory, the Constitution said the vice president would step in for a disabled president, but they didn't give a mechanism for it to happen, which meant it never happened. So you had cases like Grover Cleveland being tied to a mast on a moving ship in the Atlantic Ocean to have a cancerous growth removed from his mouth. And he
That's
was
my
clearly
favorite
unable
moment.
to
That's my
perform
favorite moment
the duties.
in the history
Oh.
of the presidency, by the way.
Yeah, that was my idea. When I was researching this, I said, how did I not learn this as a kid?
And there
This
is
is a
I
great,
just was about
well,
to say that.
horrible
there is a
presidential moment.
fabulous book about this episode, published, I
I
think,
just
by the
bought 3
University
books.
of Chicago Press. It is an awesome story. David, why don't you tell it while I look up the book?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
wait,
I think
what
it's the
happened
one that
and
I
who the
liked the
hell was
most was
teaching me?
Matthew Algeo. The President is a Sick Man, I think, is what they called that one. But the story in brief is that Grover Cleveland discovered that he had this growth in his mouth that was large and ugly. And at that time, in the 1880s, you did not mention the word cancer. It was the Voldemort of the time. It shall not be named. And
Here is a link
it was
to
also
the
during
book,
an
by the
economic
way.
panic. Thank you. It was also a time of an economic panic. And the thought was, if people knew that the president had this thing that is so dreaded, we can't possibly govern the country. So let's do something. Let's get a few doctors on a moving boat in the Atlantic Ocean when he's going up to vacation in the Northeast. And let's perform the surgery on the boat, swear them all to secrecy, and hope it goes well. And actually, it did go well. They got lucky. The seas were not rough. The doctors did their job. One dentist who was there, because they had to remove a large part of his mouth to do this, one dentist who was there did spill the beans to someone in New York, and that reporter was on it and reported it, and he was vilified. His career was ruined, and it was only after Cleveland's death that this was confirmed. Yeah, so that's a real case of a president being unable, at least for a short period of time, and it being covered up. And there have been some others when people, for a period of time, Abraham Lincoln himself, such depression, famously depressed earlier in his life to the point that he was almost committing suicide and they had to keep knives away from him. But even in the White House, when his son died, he was despondent and basically stopped governing for days at a time during a war. But Lincoln, I mean, his legendary compassion and empathy got him out of it. And maybe it made him even greater because of this great tragedy. Others have not done so well, and Wilson having the stroke is the big one. But what led to the 25th Amendment to fix this was actually John Kennedy. He died, but everybody speculated. Eisenhower has had 3 major illnesses in a row during heavy Cold War times. And now John Kennedy, if that bullet would have been 1 inch over, maybe he'd be in a coma. And we assume that Lyndon Johnson would step in and take over, but there's no mechanism for him to do so. We've got to fix this. And Congress moved relatively quickly to come up with the 25th Amendment to provide a means by which the president could step in, declare the president unable with the cabinet and all this stuff. But they could find a way to do that. So that's one unable category. Ben, you asked kind of about undermining
before you go
the president
on, I just
overall.
want to, on the 25th Amendment, I am pasting in here a link to a Lawfare podcast done by Matt Kahn with one of the last living framers of the Constitution, who is now 94 and who is
of the amendment,
a principal author of the 25th Amendment.
It's really good.
It's a very sweet interview. Which brings us to the last category. Those who were, in a true Roman sense, taken out. How many do we have?
We've had 4, and we've had many more that were close. And this was a hard chapter for me to write because I don't want to give the impression with how to get rid of a president that the idea is, you use force to get rid of a president. Methods. Yeah. So I actually overdid it, according to one good friend of mine who works in the government. He told me, yeah, I like the book. Really, really good description of history in a short way, whatever. But he said, I hate how hard you hit it's never acceptable to kill a president, so you shouldn't do it. So don't kill a president. And by the way, don't kill presidents. He said, that's overdone. And I said, you know what? I don't feel like I need to... I can overdo that point and feel okay, because what you're doing essentially, if you're choosing to assassinate a president, is you're saying, my opinion matters more than 330 million other people. And that is abhorrent. That violates everything you think you're trying to protect. So I felt more emotional writing this section than anything, except for these horrible stories of presidents who lost children and had to find a way to govern, which is horrible also. 4 presidents died. Untimely deaths, as you said, but many others came close. And the one there that stood out to me was Andrew Jackson, which, like the Grover Cleveland story, Kate, is a story I'd never heard. So Andrew Jackson is on Capitol Hill. He's coming down the steps of the Capitol building, and a man comes out, pulls a gun out of his hand, or out of his coat, pulls a gun out with his hand, shoots the president, and everybody hears the gun go off. It actually fires. But for some reason, the bullet does not exit the chamber. And everybody stands there for a second, like, is the president shot? What's happening? And the gunman realizes that it didn't work. So what does he do? He reaches in, gets a second gun, pulls it out, shoots the second gun at the president. And guess what? It fires. Everybody hears it. no bullet comes out. And at this point, Andrew Jackson, who is no slouch, picks up his cane and is about to beat he's about to beat the life out of Richard Lawrence, the guy who is shooting him. And everybody suddenly captures him, keeps the president back from killing his own assailant. They later estimated the odds of this happening, of both guns misfiring, probably because of the humidity at the time, at tens of thousands to one.
Or because
that's why they had the Capitol in D.C.
The individual was incompetent.
Yeah,
and didn't know how to load muzzle load a pistol.
They said it was loaded properly. The gunpowder went off, but it just wasn't enough to exit the bullet. And
my experience with baby cannon is that you think you've done everything properly, and then certain percentage of the time it just doesn't work.
Yeah. And of course, there was a conspiracy theory at the time, because we're good at that. But the conspiracy theory was, this is in a contentious time between Andrew Jackson and opponents like Henry Clay, who should have been president but wasn't. And everybody thought, because Richard Lawrence was talking about, well, Henry Clay and these others had me do it. But then in further interviews, he claimed to be like working for the King of England and all these. They realized he was actually clinically insane. But that's the greatest danger to the president in most of these cases, is actually people who are mentally unstable, who decide, I am going to kill the president, whether it's something like I want to impress Jodie Foster in a very different case, or I want to prove that I am the rightful heir to the throne of England and I need to kill Andrew Jackson to do it.
But I must say that the greatest example of poise under assassination attempt has to go to Teddy Roosevelt, who was campaigning, gets shot in the middle of a speech, and finishes the speech.
Before the speech. Yeah.
It was he gives this, but he gives the speech.
That's even
he
crazier.
Gives the speech.
Yeah. Now
it's awesome. It's awesome. It's so Teddy Roosevelt. It's such a Teddy story.
Roosevelt. And people get all upset about him as an imperialist, and he was like lots of bad things, I know, but that is awesome.
But he's a badass. Yeah.
He's a badass.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say
it was that time he was running for president again. He had been he had his handpicked successor who followed him. He didn't like the policies well enough. So he said, I'm going to undermine my own mentee. And then he gets shot. And his advisors all say, we're going to the hospital. And he's Teddy and nobody tells him what to do. So he says, no, I'm giving the speech. And he goes. And sure enough, the bullet, he got lucky that it happened to be a very thick speech and that slowed the bullet and everything else. But he gives the speech and announces in the speech that he has been shot and he's giving the speech anyway. I mean, you can't write this stuff. This is Veep level material, but it actually happened.
Yeah, but didn't he not get elected anyway?
Well, really? Yeah, he failed. Party run.
He failed. Well, it was really dumb. The best third party run in history, by far the best third party run in history, was Teddy Roosevelt running on his own party, his cult of personality party. But what he did is he split the non-democratic vote. So Woodrow Wilson gets in with barely more than 40% of the vote. The Electoral College just happened to skew well for him, that he could get just over 40% of the vote, but win in the Electoral College pretty easily. So it did not have to go to the House of Representatives as it had gone before.
We're going to leave it there. Sorry we didn't get to questions today, but there are so many ways to get rid of a president. We just had to walk through them. And besides, we had horse and turtle stories we needed to go with. David Priest, mystery guest, thank you for joining us today. We will be back tomorrow. We're going to have to plan the show this week off the show, maybe day by day, but we will do that. We will be back tomorrow, 22 hours and 54 minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore, but we do have horses, loggerhead turtles, and lots of ways to get rid of presidents. And we just exercised one of them. So, rah, rah, rah. Thank you, David.